As a reward for those who dance, you can have seconds food if you'd like. Even those of you who didn't dance can have seconds if you'd like. Okay, so that was our ballet interlude. You can work up your courage. The next one is going to be 50s and 60s music. So maybe that's easier for some of you. Yes. What's that? There we go. Okay. So next person who's going to come up and speak, I hope, Cathie, is Cathie Vicroy. And Cathie is the middle one, the middle sister. Remember, there's 7 sisters. Okay, not 6 sisters.
I would be number 4. Good math. I did remember a lot with Jane, and she was such a kind person. Now it was.
Can you hear in the back?
Oh. Okay. She was a kind person, and I think that everyone that's already spoken, and everyone that knew her, how kind she was. And for me, I was in junior high, 8th, 9th grade. She was at TCU. And she invited me all by myself. And when you have that many in the family, you don't get much self-time.
Wait. Oh, she hit the button. I think she hit that button on the mic.
Okay, is that
The mic is something. I know we did, but it's something. It's something dysfunctional.
May need a battery.
That may be. Where did Felix go? Yeah. You mind just even where Felix? Because there's something really there.
Somebody else got turned off.
No. Felix, there's something.
Excuse me.
No,
Bravo.
Goes on and off.
Sorry about that.
So, as you notice, we have technical difficulties.
I am loud, so if you can hear me, I'll continue. I had 2 boys, that's why. But, and also married to a Cajun, and her family was really loud. But, so my sister invited me up to the lab to come and work with her all by myself, no other sisters. And we walked into a room, and it had cages of rats and mice. I said, oh no, big mistake. But then what she wanted me to do was come and look in the microscope and pick out osteropods from seawater. And I felt so important. And I got up there in that microscope and I did that little tedious all day long. I was thrilled. I felt like such an adult. And that special time, she stayed with me. It wasn't just here, do this. And then, so, she made that special time for one of the sisters. And I remember that all my life. And when we were together in Texas last year at my other sister's house, she said, do you remember the time you came up to TCU and picked osteropods? And I said, oh my God, she remembers it too. And she remembered it. So what a special thing for her to remember it too. Is that too loud? Anyway, so that she remembered it, it's like, wow, that one little special time from all these sisters. And then she took me, I was a huge football fan in junior high, she took me to my first college game. And all by myself, no other sisters. And I was thrilled, I felt so important, and it was TCU, and it was Hook'em Horns, and
You know, just that wonderful, wonderful moment that always stays in your brain with one sister. And the next hugely impactful thing in my life, I was overseas, married, came back, a new parent, a single parent, and I was going back from there to my old job in Virginia. I'd been gone for 4 years. But I stayed with Jane and Jeff in California when I first flew in from Japan. And so I told them what was really going on. I hadn't told anyone in my family. And so Jane and Jeff talked to me, and they said, well, you really need to go to your parents and let them help you. You know, you're a new parent, a single parent. And I really didn't want to. I really didn't want to. And anyway, unbeknownst to me, Jane called my parents that night while I was sleeping. And the next day I woke up, and I was 8 years younger than Jane. And so I woke up, and she told me what she had done. I was not happy with her. But, so she had me talking to my parents. Well, I ended up, long story, I'm good for that. But, so I flew down to Louisiana, stayed with my parents. Ended up, it's still where I still live, because from that one moment of kindness for her to take care of me, I met my husband of 31 years, and he's sitting over there. So that one moment, and I wanted to hear me, changed my entire life. And we have 2 wonderful boys, and we're fixing to be grandparents for the first time. And you know, with Jane, it was because of Jane's decision to call my parents. And so her kindness, once again, lifelong impact. And yeah.
Thank you, Cathie. No, these are all amazing stories. Is this okay? Yeah. These are all amazing stories. I think what almost none of us really realizes, even if we kind of understand it, but it's hard to really understand it, is that really every moment basically changes your whole life. Everything you do every day ends up in having consequences that you don't understand. Sometimes you do, like Cathie just told you, or you'll hear later about how P22 brought Jane and I together. But most of the time, we don't understand that when we walk out the door and take a right turn rather than a left turn, in amazing ways, that just changed your whole life. So it's something to think about. Next person we're going to hear from is a colleague of Jane's at Letterly, Greig. Oh, you're right here. Get out there. Sneaked up on me. Okay, thank you.
So I had the pleasure of working for Jane back in the early 90s when she...
Can hear you.
Can you hear? Yes. Okay. So I had the pleasure... Closer. Practically up to my lips. So I had the pleasure of working for Jane back in the early 90s when she started the business development group. I had not started working for her yet, but she and I went on a trip together. And this trip was very memorable to me because it was a trip to Russia right after they broke up from the Soviet Union. And there was a group of us, I think around 7 of us, who were preparing to go on this trip for, I think it was a couple of weeks. And I don't know about anybody, I was pretty anxious about going. I had a 7-month-old at home. And honestly, I really didn't want to go. But Jane was the leader of the group. And we knew this trip was going to be eventful when we were stuck at Newark Airport getting ready to leave, and there was a bomb scare. And we were all sitting on the plane, and they all made us get off. And we had to wait several hours. We were not allowed to go home. we had to claim our luggage when when they checked the plane and everything. And that was during the time of all of the various bus bombings and things that were going on in Europe. And the flight was actually going to Germany. And so it's now 10 o'clock at night. The lights are all shining on the plane. We're being bussed to the plane to get our luggage, to get back on the plane. And all of us were looking at each other like, who's going to get on the plane? And Jane, thank God for Jane, she said, we're all going home. We're not getting on this plane. So that was the first exposure to Jane's the person that you want to have by your side. We did get on the plane the next day to go to Russia, and we had a very interesting trip. There were lots of different things that happened during the trip where Jane was always sort of like, her motherly instinct sort of took over, and she took care of all of us and made sure that we knew where we were going and what to say and what to do in a foreign place, especially like that. And so after that, I really got to know Jane very well. And even though we only worked together for 2 years because Wyatt bought Letterly and the department disbanded, we still kept in touch even after she was no longer working for Letterly. And she was always a good friend and, always helped me in my, career as I continue to work. So, I'm really going to miss her because she was always there if I needed to bounce ideas off of.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from someone who knew Jane later in life. After Jane, is this on? Yes. After Jane left Letterly, and you'll see she worked at New York University Medical School, and then at another small pharmaceutical company, and then with two other guys, the two Larrys. They had a small consulting company that did licensing deals, and Larry Horowitz is here today, and he's
Turn off. Come close. No, it's just wires.
I don't understand these things. There seems to be some issue. Is this one working?
No, it's a computer turned off. If somebody doesn't touch the computer, it's going to turn off.
Now is it working?
Try the other one. Try the other one.
Either one.
Is this one working? No.
Talk loud.
I don't understand it. It's not good.
Don't bless
Okay. I can, while he's fixing it, I can talk anyway. So,
Speak loud.
okay, so the next person, did you all hear what I said up to then? Yes. Okay. So Larry Horowitz is going to come say a few words. I know he's here. Oh, here he is. Okay. You may have to scream also, Larry. Maybe it's no.
Well, Jeff, I don't need a mic.
Okay. All right.
I grew up in the old days in the New York City school system. We had this many people in class, and so you had to learn to project. You always hear me in the back. Okay, good. When I got Jeff's email asking me to speak, without thinking, I said I'd be happy to and hit send. And then I realized, too late of course, that was happy the right word? Honored or pleased might have been better, given the seriousness of the occasion, because I think as all of us here, I was in Italy when I got Jeff's email that Jane had died, and it really just took all the air out of me for a long time. And what asking me to speak, Jeff forced me to think about Jane and my relationship with Jane, and I realized that knowing Jane made me happy. And that's what I want to share with you today, because it turns out that happy was indeed the right word for me to send to the email for Jane. Just a little background. I met Jane, we were both at Cyanamid. I was in the corporate planning development department. Jane was working for Ron Saldarini, who you'll hear from later. And Jane and I knew each other with cyanamide, and when everything sort of fell apart, Larry Elberger, two Larrys, formed a boutique consulting company called HVA to work with startup and small cap life sciences companies. The one thing that Larry and I had a lot of was finance and business development experience. What we didn't have is science. And when Jane called me up and said, would you be interested in having me join HVA, Larry and I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. It was an automatic yes. And we never regretted the decision of having Jane join us and bring with her the scientific stuff. And as you all know, Jane was probably one of the 2 or 3 most intelligent people I've ever met. And she combines with her kindness, openness, warmth, joy, and a terrific sense of humor. And while Jane did not suffer fools gladly, I think everybody can agree on that. I guess so, right? She never talked down to us. Remember, she was dealing with 2 scientific ignoramuses. She never talked down to us. She never talked down to our arrogant and often annoying clients, many of whom were scientists, but not in Jane's class. It just wasn't who Jane was. So it was a pleasure working with her. About Jane's sense of humor, I have a story not quite as good as your golden story, but Jane was telling me, I think she was at, she was at UCSF, if I remember, where she spilled a bunch of deadly viruses on a countertop. And I think if I remember right, it was HVA, I'm sorry, HIV. There's something awful. And Jane said, no, you don't have to worry about viruses. They can't live on countertops. It's the bacteria you have to worry about. Well, what do I know? But Jane was standing there telling me the story, so I figured it had to be true. When Jeff's email, there's a picture of Jane at the top of the email, and I guess she's about 6 years old, with this big smile. Of course, I met Jane much later, but I recognized the smile as soon as I saw the email. There's nobody who smiled like that. And Jane had that special smile whenever she spoke about Jeff, most of the time. Husbands are like that, right? And when she spoke about Hunter and Matt, right? And that was all the time, no exceptions there. All you had to do was start a conversation with Jane about wine, or food, or of course butterflies, and out came that Jane Scott smile. It was just like sunshine. It was really wonderful. I know you some of her sisters there. I remember Jane talking about when her father was in hospice, or as your father was in hospice. And she wasn't bemoaning it, she wasn't complaining, but it was just a love for her father that came through as she was taking him, helping him go through his last days. The last thing I want to talk about is I suffer from clinical depression. And when I get bad, I don't want to talk to anybody, I want to be by myself. And I remember having lunch with Jane when I was in one of these episodes. And I don't know why, but there was something about Jane that I started telling her how I feel. And her response was, think happy thoughts, listen to happy music. It isn't quite the response I expected from a world-class scientist. You know, it was exactly what I needed, and it really made me feel a lot better, which if any of you suffer from depression, is not an easy thing to do. Jeff, I want to just thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this, and of course doing this lovely lunch. And in fact, again, I'm happy at Jane, but also pleased and honored that you asked me to speak. And seeing all the people here, it really, again, impresses me about how lucky I was to have known Jane as a friend and as a colleague.
Thank you, thank you. I guess we're going microphoneless. A little bit of a roller coaster here. Thank you. Okay. So our next speaker isn't here. His mic off. His brother died a couple of days ago. And actually, this morning, he's having a root canal work done. And